Welcome to the Forest of Thought with me, Ingrid Rieser. It's hard to introduce the conversation you're about to hear with Felix Marquardt, partly because it ranged over so many topics, and partly because Felix himself is very difficult to put in a box. After spending years working for very powerful people in the higher echelons of society, Felix was forced to come to terms with his substance abuse and set out on a slow journey of recovery. He also spent several years writing his newly published book, The New Nomads, where he explores what migration means today and how we can find a home and become of a place in a fast-changing world. In this conversation, we talk about how patterns of addiction are playing out in all parts of our society, what sobering up might entail, and the unrecognized power of prayer.
People think that recovery is about willpower, when actually recovery is giving up the illusion of control. There is something so incredibly childish and misguided about thinking that we are running things. It's so clear to me that our tendency to have tolerance only for two kinds of knowledge, what we know and what we will know one day, that is what's killing us. And I've come to believe that our problem, our predicament, is not scientific, it's actually metaphysical. Many things became possible in terms of extraction and oppression and domination and the way we rationalized them when we got rid of the idea of God.
Felix is Austrian-American born, but raised in Paris. He counts 12 nationalities in his family, has lived in as many countries, and held as many jobs. He's run communications for large publications and companies, advised CEOs and heads of state, and founded a bunch of projects, the latest of which is called Black Elephant, an outgrowth of his New Nomads book. We spoke over Zoom, Felix from his apartment in Paris, and me in my house in Uppsala on a sunny day in February. Maybe we could start a bit with your background, because it seems like that's been really important in shaping, how you view the world. So you're American, Austrian, with a lot of other things mixed in, but you grew up in Paris, France, and so
yeah.
Could you say something about how do you think that helped to shape who you have become?
I don't know, but no. I can say, I can say, yeah. So my dad is from a part of the world called Silesia, which when he was born was still Germany, but about to become Poland, Soviet-occupied Poland. He was born himself in Western Germany. My grandmother walked across the country all the way to a suburb of Frankfurt called Bad Nauheim to try to find her husband, who was in a hospital there, and gave birth to my father. When my dad was 9 in the 50s, she moved to Vienna, became an actress at the Burgtheater in Vienna. And so my father really embraced his Austrian citizenship and Austrian identity. He got a scholarship and started studying law in Vienna and went to eventually finished his law studies in New York, and met my mom, who is born in the Bronx of Greek, Hungarian, Polish, and German descent. And they moved to Paris in the early 70s. And so my siblings and I were all born, we were all born in Paris. And I guess I myself have 3 children in 3 countries. So, so anyway, so the sort of migration is a pattern in the family. And I, in recovery from addiction, I learned about what we call geographics, which is trying to change the way you feel by traveling to places. And I can see that there's a tendency, there's a very strong tendency to do that in the family, which can be a great way to jumpstart a process. But eventually, you wherever you go, you end up finding out that you're still there. So you've brought many of the problems with you that you had wherever it was you started from. So yeah, there's definitely an urge to move and to discover. And one of the things that sparked is an interest in otherness. Migrants tend to be forced to connect with people and to be connectors, because, so for instance, when my parents arrived in France, no one invited them. The French don't invite foreigners to their dinner parties. And so my parents just started inviting people over, very different people. And I think in a way, we tend to define nomadism these days as essentially about mobility, when I think what defines the nomad is the way he or she is in the world. It's a question of posture, and it's in a way it's an openness to the possibility of apostasy in the broadest sense, like not religiously, but sort of the possibility that the way you see things might not be, that there's another way, and that it might be interesting to try that way, to try to see things in that way. So I think that's what sort of that like I have, at some point in my life, I realized that my most interesting conversations and my most interesting encounters were with people with whom I disagreed or didn't see eye to eye, or so I'm far more interested in engaging with the people that I have trouble, that I don't share the worldview of, and have trouble understanding. I mean, of course, I love to hang out with people whose worldview I embrace, I feel close to, but there's something about otherness that fascinates me.
So, well, I think we definitely want to come back to that. So when you had this very eclectic background, and then you ended up doing a lot of different things. I thought that was really interesting to read in your book. You were managing hip-hop groups and being a speechwriter and etc. But you ended up in one way or another working for very powerful people in different contexts, and spending a lot of time at places like the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is kind of this, the epitome of, what we think of when we think of rich and powerful people getting together. And you've described yourself as a former global schmoozer, which I think is a great word because it's fun to say. But could you say something about, what is a global schmoozer, and what were you doing in that life? So I come from, I did many things, as you pointed out. I ended up doing, just basically writing stuff for important people. And writing soon, at first when you get the job of a speechwriter, I thought when I started working that job, which I got basically because I could read and write in German, French, and English. And when I got that job, I thought, well,
you're going to give me the content and I'm just going to take care of the form, because obviously I can't produce the content. I'm 28. And what I found is that actually the people who run the companies that I was working for then, and the people who run the world, they are, among others, they're sort of addicted to acceleration. So they have very little time to actually sit down and think about things. So if you start putting in ideas into their speeches, most of the time they just take them. It's fascinating. So I was really amazed by the power that I suddenly discovered I had.
Yeah.
It was just mind-boggling. And that led me to realize that these people, their best kept secret is that the vast, vast majority of their bandwidth is monopolized by not looking. Yeah, most of their time is spent trying to not look like idiots or like bad people. That's really, it's amazing, but they don't really have time to run things. They don't really have time. They spend the vast majority of their time talking about how they looked and how things look and what might happen if they do this and what might happen if they do that. And, I don't think, I don't say this sort of with contempt or condescendence, although it might sound like I am. That's not at all how I feel about it. I just find it fascinating that, we need to believe that the people who are running the show are the most apt to do so. We all need to believe that, the people running the show are the right people to run the show. And I think at times, there's many things in their trajectories that explain why they got where they got, and I don't think it's easy to get there, etc. But I do think it's not it's inaccurate to describe them as wise people. I mean, they're really not. They're not. Yeah. There are many things. They can be quite brilliant. But what I find very striking is that they behave very much like addicts. They're very compulsive and obsessive in their behaviors, and of course there are exceptions, and I'm probably projecting my own addiction on some of them, but I find it's very interesting to see that in Davos, Davos, it's the tagline is committed to improving the state of the world.
Yeah.
And so what you have if you start from the premise that we've become addicted to growth and addicted to energy and addicted to consumption, and as I often say in the rooms, in the 12-step programs that I belong to, I'm addicted to more. Like you can give me anything, I can do or consume whatever it is, in an unhealthy way.
I think that's probably a general thing for a lot of people in our culture.
And so, in a way, what Davos purports to organize is like an intervention for the world, right?
Yeah.
The same way you have an intervention for an uncle who drinks too much. But
they have an intervention to make the world more sustainable, a better economy, etc. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they you know, they want to sort of say, okay, now we're going to snap out of it, and we're going to
fix this.
Sort of, you know, fix this. But the thing is, it's not just the urge to fix that is misguided.
Yeah.
It's even more so. It's the fact that the people who are purporting to fix are the people with the best crack cocaine on the block. It's crazy, like that. You know, like it in a world where sort of the definition of our addiction is essentially, you know, spending money. You can't ask the people with most of the money and most of the power and the spending power to be the ones to come up with sort of, you know, the right way of behaving.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because so you've said that when you were sort of in the middle of this, you didn't think that you had an addiction problem. But it's afterwards that you've seen that one of the reasons that you maybe thrived in those contexts was precisely because of that addiction problem, and that whole scene was playing out those same dynamics of addiction that you had started to become familiar with once you had taken a step back and sort of acknowledged that problem. And so if you're saying that the people who are in Davos, because I mean, somebody looking from the outside, and I mean, I do know people who have been to Davos, and I myself have been to not that kind of high level meeting, but, you know, like big conferences or UN conferences. So I can sort of relate to what kind of things it is that go on. And from the outside, you know, it does look like, well, here are people who, although not necessarily particularly qualified, have certain ideas about the way they think the world should be. They have certain values, they have certain priorities, and then they try to get together to find ways of making those priorities a reality. But according to, I mean, from what I hear you're saying, maybe it is not as, is it that thought out, or is it more like people are just trying to not look stupid and see if there's something that they can do that might both, quote unquote, fix something that's in the world that they think that they can fix, but maybe also just trying to be able to continue to be doing the things that they have been doing, kind of continuing business as usual.
I think the thing is, it's not, you know...
It's all of the above, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that there's no... although it often sounds like I'm being very judgmental and dismissive of these people, I am number one on the list, you know. I'm the guy who actually, thanks to some of our common acquaintances, has a pretty decent grasp of how thermodynamically insane my life is. You know, like I live in Paris. I have a kid in Stockholm whom I visit once a month at least. My partner lives in Athens, you know, and I go there once a month. You know, so my carbon footprint is an insult to everything I say. Right? Yeah. So I'm not at all judging. I'm just, I think I find it fascinating how we somehow have a lot of, we think we've transcended belief systems, and that now we have sort of reached sort of, you know, that it's reason, science, objectivity that governs the way we behave.
Yeah.
And I think it's very obvious to me that, and actually it's obvious to anyone who studies, you know, cognitive behavioral science, that that's simply not the way things work. We use reason to rationalize the way we behave, not to change our behavior. You know, when I was doing coke on a daily basis, I knew it was bad for my health, for my career, for my relation with my kid. I had bouts of anger. I was horrible to my partner. I was a wreck, and I could see it, eventually. I mean, there were also moments where I thought I was James Bond and awesome, but I could see it was not healthy. And the thing is, that awareness in no way allowed me to stop putting 3 grams of white powder up my nose on a daily basis. So, like this idea that it's about understanding,
right?
That's how we get out of this behavior.
Right. And
it's just not true. If that were the case, we now have 3 decades of IPCC reports telling us that we're committing civilizational suicide. It's very funny. I loved Don't Look Up. I know I'm not very original, but I had a great time watching it. I think Adam McKay is a genius. What I love about it is I watch it. I think it's amazing. I laugh. And I go straight back to my bullshit. It like the idea, we realize that we're not looking up. We look up for an hour and a half and laugh, and then we go back to not looking up.
So what was it that helped you? I mean, what was it that helped you to first of all realize that you had an addiction problem in the specific cocaine and drugs and drink sense, and then also how that sort of expanded into an understanding of how the problems that we're dealing with on a greater scale could also be related to that? What was it? If it wasn't an rational understanding, what was it?
It was pain.
Pain.
It's really interesting. Like, I've spoken to, while I was writing the new Nomads, I kept talking to people, to sort of behavioral change experts. And every single one of them told me the only thing that changes human behavior in a sort of sustained, meaningful way is pain. Which sounds pretty awful, but I mean, to me, it's pretty clear that there's truth to that. And it's interestingly the only thing that they pointed to as an example of a sort of a process that allowed people to change, sort of a methodology that allowed people to change once a certain threshold of pain was reached, was 12-step programs. And so, right now the problem that we have is that right now, the people who are producing the pain and the people who are feeling the pain are not the same people. So, my lifestyle produces very little pain in my life. But it produces a significant amount of pain for people in a place, like the Horn of Africa, the Sahel Desert, Honduras, Nicaragua.
Although I also wonder sometimes if, I do think that the people who are living more privileged lifestyles, that we do feel the pain, but we have perhaps found ways of numbing ourselves to it. But I do think that, considering the amount of people who are very unhappy, who are depressed, or on antidepressants, or who I don't know how it is in France, but in Sweden, burnout is like a new kind of epidemic. And I think that that can also be cases where we're not opening ourselves to the pain that
no question,
we do feel, and that can be instructive. So it's maybe not that we need to go looking for the pain, but more to open ourselves to, because I do think that there's the grief that people feel for the world, and how you feel like it's impossible to live a life that isn't, a boot in the face of someone or some place somewhere.
I agree with you. It's
Although I'm not saying that those are the
simple
same. I'm not saying that those are the same things. I'm just thinking that, okay, now that we are, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with that. I'm just adding to it.
I hear you. I think clearly we're, there's the same way there's many different kinds of violence, and some of them are very apparent and some are less striking, less graphic. Pain is the same thing. There's like your basic contemporary form of Weltschmerz in Sweden or France, which by the way consumes even more antidepressants than Sweden per capita. I think France is number 1 worldwide. And it's not by chance, by the way, that France and Sweden are sort of the kingdoms of modernity as a belief system.
Right.
They're sort of the most fundamentalist modernists are found in or some of them are found in these countries, and the ethos of both countries is really based on sort of hardcore modernity or hardcore modernism. But I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say. What saved my life was sheer despair. Like I got to a point where, I'll be very, very clear here, because I think it's just the simplest way. I got to a point where I had a 12-year-old son, and I thought he was the most important thing in my life. And I loved to tell everyone around me that he was the most important thing in my life. And I sort of had an unspoken rule most of the time to not do hard drugs around him. I smoked joints all the time around him, but I didn't do hard drugs until I did. And I ended up in a place where I was doing so much cocaine that I had palpitations when I was doing it, and suddenly it struck me after a night of doing cocaine all night as he slept next door that I was willing to take the chance that he would find me dead on the bathroom floor. And it's when there was a sort of a moment of truth. Where I said my first prayer, and my first prayer was, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. And it's really interesting because, most people these days think of, you either believe or you don't believe. You either have faith or you don't have faith. There's agnostics and there's atheists and there's people who believe in God or, who have some kind of a belief system. But there's no bridge between the two. And in a way, what I found is a bridge. But I didn't start praying and believing. Or I didn't start praying because I believed.
Right.
My belief did not precede my praying. I started praying, and that gave way to faith. And I have a dear friend whom you should really interview, who's much more erudite and just a properly amazing mind. Is a philosopher who is who's currently a researcher at Columbia, named Mohamed Amer Mesian. And he talks about, he wrote an amazing book. I have it here, actually. He wrote this amazing book called Empires Under Earth. And it's a book about, he calls it an ecological and racial history of secularization. It's a book on the link between sort of colonial empires, death of what we call in Europe, death of God, and the beginning of the processes that have been unfolding since we started industrializing the consumption of fossil fuels. And he came up with this term, which I find just absolutely brilliant, of secularocene. And I've come to, you know, how I had this phase, I don't know about you, but when I became familiar with the writings of people like Kevin Anderson, that was my phase where I was trying to look at the science. For me, it was all about the science. Right.
Yeah.
It was, look, like we are committing suicide. A plus B equals doom.
Yeah.
And I've come to believe that our problem, our predicament, is not scientific. It's actually metaphysical.
Mm.
I think something happened to us when we stopped believing. When we many things became possible in terms of extraction and oppression and domination, and the way we rationalized them when we got rid of the idea of God.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of pulling of that thread, I think, in years to come. But there's an incredible insight there about, for instance, he shows quite well that in Europe, the relation to the Muslim world was as an enemy, but there was no dehumanization going on until Europeans stopped believing in God. When they stopped believing in God, their whole relationship to the world and to the other, to the colonies, to the it becomes they define themselves in opposite, or we define ourselves in opposition to.
Yeah.
And we started writing the story of how people who believed in God were sort of, misguided and less developed.
Yeah.
Unsophisticated. And so, contrary to what we often think, the dehumanization of Muslims, it follows secularization rather than precedes it.
Right.
Which I find very interesting too. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent.
No. I think it's very interesting, and I think there's so many dimensions to that, and I've thought about the same thing as well, where in at least in Sweden or the parts of Europe that I'm familiar with, you can believe in God if you want to, but it's sort of taken, like you said, as this. It's almost a bit embarrassing if you take it seriously, almost.
Yeah. In France, it's like, what I say often is, there was this big thing in France about how. So I converted to Islam,
right? And
so I've many friends who are Muslim.
Yeah. And
I've seen sort of the stigma that goes with it, and it's fascinating. There was a study that came out a couple years ago, which has stuck in the minds of the French, which is that 65% of French Muslims consider that their faith comes before their citizenship.
Right.
And sort of the French go, oh, you see, this is proof. These people are crazy. Like, how dare they, And I'm like, as someone who believes in God, like, of course my faith comes first. Like, it's just like, you know, is it, if like, imagine, you know, for a Polish person, is it Jesus, number one, or the president of the fucking country right now? Exactly. I mean, like, of course, this is not about being Muslim. It's just about having an understanding of faith that is meaningful.
Yeah.
The problem is, in France, believing in God is exactly the same. Like, saying I believe in God is pretty much as weird as saying I believe in Santa Claus.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and the interesting thing is that, because for me it also ties into something that's been coming up on the podcast a lot with people, which is that it relates to what you were saying about the book that your friend wrote as well, because there's something about how when we are so sure that God does not exist, then that also means that the world is completely controllable, and there is no fundamental aspect that is beyond us, beyond our understanding. I mean, I don't mean to. Yeah. I don't mean to. I know that people who are atheists may say, "Well, I don't feel that way." I mean, I do think that the world is fundamentally mysterious, etc. And you know, that may be. But I do still think that the basic approach of people, and also people in power, the people who go to Davos, like we were talking about, the idea is still that the world is fundamentally a place that we can manage and administrate and control. And in fact, we have to do that. Otherwise, who knows what will happen? Otherwise, it'll be total chaos. It's our duty to take charge of this planet and to govern it too. And the funny thing is that when people will then say, well, yeah, you know, we need to do something. And I think that's, we were speaking before about how, I mean, I think that before I had my own sort of life crisis, I was in this more activist mode, which was very valuable for me and which shaped me to a large extent, where I was, you know, trying to figure out how I was going to make an impact and fix things and, you know leverage points and, you know, etc. And I think, you know, speaking of that pain that we were speaking about before and the despair, I mean, when I was hit with this despair and understood that it was possible to give up my idea of control, my idea that I could control the world, but that doesn't at all mean that to give up on the idea that I can be in the world in a way that will change the world. And it's a difficult kind of distinction for people, because especially in this urgency and crisis sort of framing, which is completely understandable, we get so caught up on this, well, we have to do something. And I'm a bit worried also about what's going to happen as more and more of the people who go to places like Davos are realizing, well, you know, this is not a good direction. It's civilizational suicide, like you were saying. When that really hits them for real, will they have the courage to, like you have, really deeply examine the kinds of addictive and compulsive behaviors that have led us to that place? Or are they going to channel all of that energy into fixing it in a different way? I mean, you can imagine lots of ways that could play out.
There's so many things there. It's so this is not there's no courage involved, you know. It really just is. There's right. It's very important to understand that. Like, I discovered that you know, oftentimes when I say I used to do a lot of drugs and I don't anymore, people say, right. Oh, well done, you know, well done, good on you. I'm like, I have literally, like, the definition of my recovery is awareness of the fact that I have done fuck all. I have amazing reasons to be grateful, like huge gratitude, but I don't have merit. Yeah. Because what drove me to change was, again, pain. So, I was, and it's not just that, it's also people think that recovery is about willpower. When actually recovery is giving up the illusion of control.
Interesting.
It's actually, recovery is about letting go, not holding.
Right.
So when you say, what you said about, not controlling, and there is something so incredibly childish and misguided about thinking that we are running things.
Yeah.
There's such an incredible lack of humility in this illusion of control. And it's so clear to me that our tendency to have tolerance only for two kinds of knowledge, what we know and what we will know one day, that is what's killing us. And what's interesting to me is that, this has been around, even in Western civilization, for 2,500 years. The Apology of Socrates by Plato is all about the guy saying, I know more than all of you fuckers because I know that I don't know fuck all. Therefore, since I'm the only one who recognizes that I don't know jack shit, I know more than you. And it's crazy. 2,500 years later, no one seems to recognize this.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's sort of basic. It's so basic. What we know will always be infinitely smaller than what we don't know. Period. So.
But don't you think also that people find this saying that we're not in control, because it seems like we're in control because we do things, or as humans we do things and we alter the climate, and if we're saying that we're not in control, then we're just going to sit around and not do anything and let the world go up in flames. So how do you?
Yeah. So this is a common. This is a very normal reaction to what I've been saying, right? So, okay, so what you're saying is let's just sit on our butts and do nothing, watch Netflix, and, no, the way, what I've noticed is what allows me to my favorite saying perhaps in life comes from a French Christian author, quite conservative, named Georges Bernanos, and he said something to the effect of, the highest form of hope is despair overcome. And how do I find, since that moment of absolute paralyzing despair, which, by the way, I've experienced on drugs, and I've experienced since then in recovery. A moment of, I remember, when I started realizing the gap between the story that's told on the news every day about where we are, and sort of the science, the actual data. The gap between the two stories is so staggering that I went into a phase of despair. But what I've noticed is I find solace merely from the righteous action in itself is an end. If I wake up in the morning and I manage to get through my day without acting like a self-centered jackass, that is it's a great life.
Yeah.
It's a great life.
Yeah.
And so to answer this question about, I could just sit in bed all day and watch Netflix or other forms of, resignation, is actually, I am the least resigned person, or not very humble, but like what I mean is I don't feel resigned at all. I really don't. Like I am fundamentally still an optimist. But I separate, and this is also something I got in recovery from drugs, I separate my actions from the results.
Okay.
I am in the actions business.
Yeah.
And a higher power, whom I choose to call God or Allah, is in the results business. As long as I stay in my lane and focus on taking action, and I don't get sort of carried away into thinking that my actions are going to have this result.
Right.
I can behave sort of with some kind of virtuous element in itself. And for me, it's really important to disconnect my actions from the results, which is not at all sort of, this is like our whole culture is based on, results oriented.
Yes.
Like that's supposed to be like the important thing. Like the right thing is about impact, I actually think we need to go back to disconnecting our actions from the results. Because the illusion that we are, in a way, recovery from drugs is giving up the illusion that we are running the show.
Yeah.
And I don't think at all that it leads to, resignation or intellectual masturbation. I think it's the key to, or at least for me, it's what allows me to not go crazy and to have, reverence for the fact that I don't know.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
And in the end, I do think that paradoxically, like you said, removing the focus from the results can bring about exactly, things can then unfold in a way that we could not have imagined, precisely because we were giving things that space.
Yeah. If you write a book and you're thinking about what will happen when people read it, I guarantee you will write a really shitty book.
Yeah.
If you stay focused on the process of enjoying what you're sharing and sort of write what you're writing as a gift, like this is my present to someone else and I hope it helps them, I mean, it's guaranteed you'll write something much more probably entertaining and useful.
So I was thinking if we come back to your book a little bit,
sure.
Because I think one of the things that it's been interesting to see, you wrote this piece that it's called Davos is Dead and Coronavirus Killed It, where you talk about a lot of the things that we've just been speaking about. But it's interesting to see that there's been a lot of pushback against, especially Davos during the pandemic. So they released this in 2020. They launched their agenda for that year's meeting, which was the Great Reset, which has sort of become this huge, rallying point for various people to sort of protest against what they see as globalist power. But I think it follows a trend of criticism and fed upness with this globalist idea of, well, we're this self-selected group that's going to now fix things because everything's a mess. And so we're going to organize it all. So anyway, in the pushback against that, I think that there's also there's the danger of people then turning towards things like nationalism and nativism and tribalism, like you also say. And I feel like the work that you're doing in your book about the new nomads is also trying to point out that we don't need to get rid of the good things about international exchange, about the fact that we're global, and also that we, but also that we maybe need to learn to be nomads that are also, like you say, that we can learn to become of the places that we.
Yeah, there's this apparent contradiction between being, so what I tried to look at is, so when I set out to write the book, I was still going to Davos. And frankly, what I pitched to Simon & Schuster was, I'm going to write basically The World is Flat, 20 years after Tom Friedman. It's going to be about how, mobility is awesome, how we should all migrate, how migration is great, and anyone who's against it is a fascist. And that sort of was the pitch. And that was, literally, that is the Davos view. That was the Davos view of migration. And then as I sort of learned belatedly that writing a book was not the same thing as writing 100 columns, which is what I had set out to do. And I sort of started the painstaking process of learning slow thinking, slow writing. I realized that this idea, this vision I had of nomadism was completely misguided. And I realized it because when I was in Davos, I told people I'm writing a book called The New Nomads, and basically everyone was like, oh, amazing, amazing. I have a bungalow in Bali and a chalet in Gstaad and a loft in Soho. So I'm a nomad. And suddenly I realized, there was no place in the world where that term was more popular than in Davos. I was like, what the fuck? 60, 70 years ago, the nomad was the vagrant, the bum, the gypsy, the wandering Jew, all things very unpopular in the West. And suddenly it was the single coolest thing to be in life was a nomad. Among the people who were the richest and the most powerful in the world. I was like, how did that flip happen? So basically the book became a sort of journey to try to understand how we went from this negatively connotated term to sort of the favorite way of projecting social status of elites. Tell me how many times a year you take the plane, I'll tell you who you are. And coming from people who take the plane every other day, it was very clear what the trend had become. Nomadism was mobility, period. Essentially. And the story of this book is about realizing that people who travel at great speed across the world to meet other people who travel at great speed across the world are not nomads, because the word nomad comes from the Greek nomos, which is the pasture, and the pasture-centric dimension of the nomad means that the nomad is fundamentally a local creature. The nomad is a local expert. The nomad is wary of not fucking up his or her environment. And that means that by definition, the nomad is a frugal creature, interested in connection with its surroundings, whether people or fauna, and the rest of the metabolism we call nature, so clumsily called nature, I should say. And so suddenly was emerging something very different, right? Like a creature that's focused on community, engaging with the other, and realizing that the other is not the other, that we're all part of the same metabolism. And that gave way to a worldview that where I tend to look at, like, if we are one metabolism, the people who vote for the Sweden Democrats are not bad people, more than a lung that is not functioning properly is a bad lung. Maybe it's unhealthy. I'm not going to mock or disparage a person who has thinking that I find unhealthy and can't relate to. If I meet someone who has cancer or diabetes, I don't make fun of them. I don't attack them. And so for me, what I see in the way people are turning to far-right parties is it's one reaction to modernity among many others. And there's something strangely healthy about the reaction. It's like, what I mean is that it's not that I'm not saying that I embrace the way they are reacting. I think the answers they bring to some questions are just ridiculous and completely lacking in perspective oftentimes. But the fact that there is a reaction is
potentially a sign of health.
Yeah, I mean, it means that there's something there, and I think that it's important to understand that the reaction of the modernists and the many progressives, which is shame on you for thinking that way, is really not helpful. Because the first thing we should do is recognize the pain that is behind that worldview. And recognize that in a world that normalizes insanity, there is something healthy in being pained. And so the answer of the modernists, which is, if you're depressed, if you don't think things are getting better for an increasingly large amount of humans on planet Earth, since, the Reform, the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, you are a depressive Nietzschean or, a frustrated Marxist. No, the first thing we need to do is recognize you're absolutely right. There's something fucking wrong about the world.
Yeah.
And our pretense that this is somehow normal is abhorrent. So if you want to fight the far right, you have to start from a place that says, I don't condone or I'm not saying that you guys are like the answers that your responses are healthy.
Yeah. But
the fact that you recognize that there's something awfully wrong here is a sign that it's important to recognize that they are right. There is something fucking wrong here. And that's the premise for a conversation that can be generative with those people.
And I think that the strategy having been for a long time from progressives and liberals to say, well, nothing's wrong, everything's great, or like if there's something wrong, then it's that you guys are racists, and that's the problem, and that's the only problem that we have here. And not to say that that isn't a problem, I'm just saying that kind of response is also actually, by not acknowledging something, I think we're also inadvertently making it grow stronger and fester, and we sort of have to, in a way, take the blame for some of that. And if we would more honestly and in more nuanced way have those conversations, then probably the far right would not be doing so well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
No, absolutely. I did a column in the French press recently about how it was basically enough with primitive anti-far right discourse. So enough with the just saying people who want to vote for Éric Zemmour or Le Pen or the other nutters are bad people. I mean, it's just very unhelpful. And at the end of the day, I think it's not just unhelpful. This is what is building these people up more than anything else. Because the corollary of the meritocratic myth that says that if you just see things positively, if you're not an idiot and you work hard, you're going to do really well in this world.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, nowhere is that narrative more popular than in Davos.
Yeah.
So you have the people who are the most privileged in the world in terms of sort of level of studies, level of studies and wealth, who are all saying that they are pure products of meritocracy. But the corollary of that is that if you have a difficult life, if you can't feed your children, if you're jobless, if you live in a horrible estate housing, if there's violence all around you, it's because you're not deserving. You're an idiot. You don't work hard enough. Of course, that becomes an incredible fuel for the far right. Yeah.
Well, do you have any advice? Sorry, do that. I mean, I think that we all have some aspects of addiction in the way that we have been talking about it. That we have, either we're addicted to the ideas of progress or individualism or secularism or colonialism, or just our own ideas about who we are. So do you have anything you would like to say, to speak to that a bit, about how do we start to sober up and to break those patterns of addiction?
I'm afraid not.
Okay.
I'm afraid. I certainly don't have advice. That's for sure. I think that what I can say is that pain is the key. Pain is the key. I think it's probably useful to go towards the pain sometimes, to just confront it, because that has more pedagogical power than most things. I think I guess my advice above all, and this comes from a person I come from militant agnosticism, which, I was brought up to believe that people who believe in God were sort of simpletons and ill-educated.
Yeah.
And I've come to a place where my faith is the most important thing in my life. And I would say that don't believe, as our culture tells us, that you need to have faith to start praying. If you want to try to see if you can become faithful, start by praying. Faith will come.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Something that we haven't touched upon?
It's wonderful for me to be able to have a sort of time to chat at length about these things. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And I get well by trying to help others deal with their addiction issues. So there's something about recovery that is very virtuous, because I save my own ass by giving away some of the things that I have learned or that I have experienced to others. And so I'm very happy to talk with people who want to do something about their addiction. I think I'd end on that. If they want to contact me via you or directly, feel free, people.
Thank you. Thank you for that offer.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation. It was really, it was fascinating and really illuminating for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can definitely recommend reading Felix's op-ed in the Financial Times entitled Davos is Dead. You can find Felix at newnomads.org. His latest project is Black Elephant, an in-person social media which brings together people from all backgrounds and walks of life to share about the intimate and the difficult. You can find links to all of this and more in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/forestofthought. Read more and listen to all of our episodes at forestofthought.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.